We will get started. I'm sure a couple people are going to be trickling in. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. This is the second session in our four-part series. Today, we are going to be speaking on post-market surveillance under MDR. We have six speakers as last time. We have Salman, Raza, and Daniëlle Sleegers. So moving on to our little details on our speaker. So Daniëlle Sleegers, she's coming from our team, MedEnvoy, Director of Regulatory Affairs and PRC. And then Salman will be our guest speaker today, and he is coming from Resolution Bureau as the principal consultant. So today we'll be going over auditing PMS under MDR, the most common NCs identified during the PMS audits, and most common NCs identified during NCA market surveillance activities. We will have a short Q&A session at the end, so we'll try to cover as many questions as we can. If we don't cover them, we do also have a moderator on our team that will be in the question box answering your questions throughout. And if anything doesn't get answered, we'll make sure to follow up with an email. At the end of the session, you'll receive an email with the recording of this along with the summary and the presentation slides. So we'll provide that all at the end and send that out to you via email. So without further ado, Salman, welcome.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining from across the globe. One thing that I should mention, that apart from being a consultant at Resolution Bureau, I'm actively auditing for notified bodies, so bringing notified body perspective during that session. So it will be, so today I'm wearing a auditor's hat and we'll be sharing information how a notified body auditor audits while on site. Before we start, there is a poll. Can we run the first poll and see what the audience is? Well, let's put that first one. Okay, so let me know when the poll has ended.
Yeah, poll is complete.
So before we start getting into the notified body as expectations during an audit, let's refresh our memory for some requirements. What are the post-market surveillance under MDR is? So there are two terminology introduced in the MDR, post-market surveillance and market surveillance. So we need to understand difference between these two activities. So post-market surveillance, as it describes and defined in the MDR, it means all activities carried out by the manufacturer. So all the activities that the manufacturer performs in cooperation with the other economic operators, including authorized representative, importers, and distributors. And they collect systematically information, both proactively and reactively, and review the information, analyze and present. So that and a set of activities performed by manufacturer. And there is another set of activities being conducted by the regulators and competent authorities. So that set of activities is called market surveillance. And that means the activities carried out by the competent authorities to measure and check and ensure the devices comply with the requirements as per the MDR. And then they are collaborating and liaising with the notified bodies in that context as well. However, there are two independent activities. They happen at distinct platforms. So one of the main things that we need to emphasize, and I could not emphasize enough, that post-market surveillance is not an event. It is not an activity that you all of a sudden think of it and then prepare something as an event. It's not an afterthought. It's a continuous process. and we have to ensure that it is continuously implemented. So one of the main aspects the auditors are looking for during an audit, if the post-market surveillance is acted and treated like a process. And we will talk about process in more detail, but one of the key takeaway, if you were to take one takeaway today, is it is a process, not an event. We continuously do that, and you have to demonstrate that you have been doing it throughout the year. It's not happens afterthought. So when we talk about process, like any other process, a process takes inputs, and then it takes some assessment analysis, and then produce an output. So in terms of post-market surveillance under MDR, your input must have at least two main types of sources: reactive sources and proactive sources. So reactive sources are the ones that things have already happened to your device. Complaints, any vigilance, any non-conformities, any out of specification, any audit findings, something that already has happened to your device. So you're reacting to a situation, an issue. Proactive elements that has not happened to your device yet, but you have become aware of it. So the data or information you are getting from literature, clinical literature, or a more database or competent authority database where a similar technology or similar device from your competitor or someone else has experienced something. It hasn't happened to your product yet, but you're proactively assessing if it is applicable to you and taking appropriate action. So there are proactive elements and reactive elements, and then we take both set of inputs, and then it goes through your analysis, data collection, and at the end, as a process output, you should have a formal report. And that activity, as I said, it is a continuous process activity, and we have to define the process. Manufacturer has to define the process, the frequency of each activity, and the output. So under the MDR, post-market surveillance should be treated as a system. So it's not a one event. It is a system, it's a regime, and within that system, within that regime, they can be and they should be several tools and several resources that you are getting information from. So for each device or each family of the device, you should have a plan, you should follow the process that you have established, you have all the activities that you have identified, you should collect evidence. And when we say evidence, documented evidence is usually the best practice. And then of course, whatever actions you have identified, you implement them, you maintain the records and continuously do that. So a plan for each device is important, or the family of device. Then when we are planning, we have to ensure that all type of activities, they are part of our plan. So what is happening in the market for the similar technology or similar devices, any serious incidents, what are the nature of those incidents, and literature, what's being published in clinical literature, what is trending, what are the complaints, what sort of complaints. The important aspect is you don't necessarily have to limit your activities to the complaints and vigilance. Any non-serious complaint that they on their own right, they may not be considered reportable or vigilance, but if the frequency is getting higher, we have to trend those non-serious issues, but it is happening frequently, so we also have to include those type of trending in our planning activities. So that's important that we identify all the planning activities. Once we have identified those elements, we have to demonstrate that we are taking those inputs back to our other quality management system processes, such as risk management, your clinical evaluation, any post-market clinical follow-ups, any design changes, any reporting, any corrective action or preventive action. So all these, they are directly linking with your other established quality management system processes. And this is where the auditors focus a lot more, that the interaction between your post-market surveillance and your other processes, such as risk management, clinical evaluation, design changes, and CAPA. So that's very important that we not only understand this requirement, but come up with a provision in our procedures and QMS that we demonstrate the interaction with these. So as a plan, we already spoke about what should happen and what should have in the plan: proactively collecting sources of data from reactive sources, in proactive elements, compare all the information, analyze information, and make sure that all the elements that are expected in our MDR and guidance document, we must identify them in the post-market surveillance plan. So that's important, that we understand the requirement and translate those requirements first into procedure, and then implement our procedure and generate a product-specific plan. So once we have the plan, then we have to execute the plan. And once the plan is being executed, we have to report as an output of the process. So for class 1 medical devices, we have the terminology that we use is post-market surveillance support. Very nothing different. We've been doing that for a number of years, a post-market surveillance report. So a post-market surveillance report for class 1 device collects all the information, summarize all the analysis that we have done as per the plan, include all the rationales and justification for any CAPA conducted. One of the key difference between class 1 and class 2B and 2 and 3 is the frequency of the reporting. So class 1 product, you generate the report as necessary. For example, you have a change, significant change, design change, or any change, so you update the post-market surveillance, or you define the frequency. You define what should be deducted as a manufacturer. You could say, I'll update every year, every 2 years. There is no mandatory mandated time requirement in the regulations, but it should be defined. So if you have not defined that frequency in your procedure, that is in non-conformance from notified body perspective. Even though class 1 product notified bodies don't audit you, but if they are auditing you against ISO 13485 under regulatory requirements, it will be identified as a non-conform. So important thing, we define the frequency and update as necessary in an event of a significant change. For class 2A, 2B, and class 3 devices, MDR uses a different terminology. We call it periodic safety update report. So fundamentally, the intent of the exercise is exactly the same, but the thoroughness and rigor is expected to be a lot more than class 1 device. So we need to identify what we had identified in our plan, and we collect all the information that is required. So even if that certain elements that you have not there's no update to it, but we identified in the plan, you should have a section in your report, PSUR report, and then justify if you don't have any data for that. But must be visible and demonstrate that you, as a manufacturer, you're making an informed decision about that specific product. So if you didn't have any vigilance report, or if you didn't have any customer complaints, you must have a section in your report that what is the status of customer complaints, what is the status of the vigilance. The other element of having a report is the communication of this. Ideally, in an ideal world, when UDAMED is fully operational, as a manufacturer, you have to upload the PSUR into UDAMED. However, until then, you have to communicate and come up with a mechanism to share that PSUR or periodic safety update report with your notified body. So notified bodies, a lot of notified bodies, they have created a dedicated emails. They expect you to submit through dedicated emails certain times. So they should be a mechanism, a defined mechanism, how you will communicate with your notified bodies. And then, of course, you can interact with your notified body to ensure that their expectations are met. Not during the audit, by the way. It has to be done prior to the audit, because during the audit, if there is no evidence that there is a established mechanism to communicate, it will be a non-conformance. So the content of the PSUR, fundamentally, philosophically, what we are trying to demonstrate is in the context of in which the product is being used in the market. So what is the risk profile of the device? Who is your target user? What is the profile of that? How many you are selling? How many issues you are seeing? So we are creating a context, how safe or how unsafe or how risky that device is. So one of the ways of demonstrating that, one of the effective ways that we demonstrate in the context of, for example, sales to complaints ratio, or use install base to complaints ratio, or test perform versus complaints ratio, any indication that demonstrate the context in which the device is being used. So if you receive, for example, a single use device, you sold 100 units and you receive 100 complaints, that is unacceptable. That's a lot. But if you have received 100 complaints in response to a 1 million unit sold, that is not as significant as 100 versus 100. So you are giving context. So that is important. So the ultimate aim is to assess if benefit of using the device, is it outweighing the risk associated with it, or it's other way around, so risk outweighing the benefit. So we are assessing that context by providing all these elements, all the inputs, parameters that we have decided to. And of course, this is what we expect. So there are very nice, very good templates available in the guidance document. So MDCG 2022-21, it gives a very good template. So it is not mandatory, but it is advised that those templates should be considered. So the reporting frequency for 2A and 2B, so class 1, as we said, you define the frequency and then follow that frequency. For 2A, whenever necessary, any significant change, or at least every 2 years. For 2B and class 3, you have to update at least annually and share that with your notified body. So that's important. Other
Just
than
to
the
add, and to add to that, so for the UK, Salman, as we discussed previously, now that there is a new update to the UK regulation, class ones are obliged to update their PMS document at least every 3 years. So that is new requirement, which is not included in the MDR at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle. So yes, so that's the frequency. It has to be carefully understood and translated into procedure, and then procedure must be followed. So from auditing perspective, this is what they're looking. Have you defined, understood the requirement, defined in the procedure, and followed that procedure? So for some additional specific requirements for custom-made devices, your PSUR should be part of your technical documentation as required. Same with the class 3 devices or implantable devices. That is a little more rigor. You have to show, submit that to notified body. Currently, UDAMED is not fully operational, but your PSUR, most recent, most updated version, must be shared with notified body, and they must have access to it. And of course, notified bodies also have to share that with the competent authority. Um, so that is the documentation. So from we before we go into the audit expectations, we had a couple of polls we should have gone through. So should we start with
Yeah,
second?
first we'll go through the next poll. What is the biggest challenge your company faces in conducting PMS activities? So feel free to share in there just to gauge where everyone is at with their activities. Okay, it looks like the limited resources is the #1 reason. Okay,
Yeah.
next one. Next poll we have, is your company actively conducting PMCF for devices already on the market? Okay, looks like the #1 so far is yes, we have ongoing PMCF activities for all our devices. And one more poll before we move on. How has the absence of UDMED impacted your PMS activities? Okay, so far, most people are saying we're not affected. We don't rely on UDMED, followed by it has created some challenges, but we are coping. But #1, we're not affected yet. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So one thing, one of the poll questions, I think it's important that we emphasize the post-market clinical follow-up as well. So post-market clinical follow-up is part of the post-market surveillance system. So years gone by in the previous regulatory regime, post-market surveillance, post-market clinical follow-up, if not required, companies and manufacturers used to demonstrate that they just verbally, anecdotally inform the auditors that it's not required, it's established technology, so on and so forth, there's no residual risk, and it was to a greater extent was acceptable. However, under MDR, anything of that nature is not acceptable anymore. So even if your device it's established technology, there's no outstanding residual risk, you still need a post-market clinical follow-up plan. So you must have a plan covering all the elements as required by the MDR. And then within that plan, you can justify if you need to conduct any activity or not. You can link back with your risk management. You can still demonstrate that it's part of the continuous post-market surveillance regime, but we cannot accept as an auditing organization that you don't have a PMCF plan and activity. So it must have defined, documented, and even though there is no ongoing activity, you must have a plan and documented rationale for what is the status. So moving on to the audit expectation. So during an audit, especially the on-site QMS audit, the intent, as I have explained, is on the process. So auditors are looking for if you have a documented procedure that complies with all the requirements that we have quickly refresh ourselves with. So procedure, so the workflow, first, have you understood the requirements and have you translated those requirements in your procedure? So have you contextualized the requirements into your procedure? A lot of time as an auditor, what we have seen, people copy paste a lot in their procedure without contextualizing in your manufacturer's regime. So be careful. Don't just quickly copy paste from the regulations into your procedure. Only explain requirements in your procedure that are applicable to your product. So if you have only class 1 device, then I don't necessarily need to see class 3 requirements in your procedure. if you don't have a class 3 product, why the procedure talks about class 3, it gives an impression to the auditor that you don't know what you're doing. You are copying pasting. So be careful what the procedure is presenting. It should be contextual information. The other thing that we are ensuring that the procedure collects both elements, uh, proactive and reactive, and it is done as a process activity throughout the year. It's not like an event. So we are making sure that it is a planned, proactively collection of data. Um, so, and once, if you are doing a virtual manufacturer, if you're undertaking that role, then of course we need to have mechanism in place that how you will collect information and how you will manage that information from virtual manufacturer. All the other usual data, and if you have separate procedure, we expect to see the direct cross-references and linkages between your customer complaints data process, your vigilance process, your market assessment and feedback overall. So that is the intent of the audit. So what we are looking for as an auditor, as I explained, procedure must meet the requirements as explained in the Article 83 and Vigilance 87 to 89. We have guidelines, very detailed guidelines nowadays with MedDev, with MDCG. All these sources that you have identified, you are collecting information, and if you don't, for whatever reason, we must have a reason or justification for why the information is not present. All the product, for example, if you have a class 1 product as well as other classes, so auditing organization will be looking at if you have generated class 1 post-market surveillance report or not, even though they are not auditing your product as a notified body, but from a process point of view, they will ask and check that if you have generated a PMS report as per your procedure for your class 1 devices. Your plan, again, if it is translating all the requirements from your procedure and regulations, and then if you are including all the elements and capturing all the information, and if needed, if you are updating specific documents as appropriate, the other thing that I explained earlier, the linkages between your established procedures linked with post-market surveillance and risk management, post-market surveillance and clinical evaluation, your corrective action, preventive action. So all these processes that are independent, but they should interact with post-market surveillance, and they should be a indication and evidence of demonstrating that. So if there is, we spoke about post-market clinical follow-up plan, whether it is ongoing activities or not, it should be, the plan should be available. And then if there are no activities, you can justify, must have a justification with the clear indication from risk management and clinical data. It also should demonstrate the communication mechanism between your all the stakeholders, especially the economic operators, how you are as a manufacturer communicating with your importers, your EU wrap, your distributors, any users. So anyone, how you interact, how do you collect information. So that's important. So one of the common mistake that we are seeing nowadays, that a lot of time as an auditor, we ask the questions, do you have any complaints? And so we find out there's a lot of complaints in one country, but there's no complaints in another country. And then it appears a little odd. And then when you investigate a little more, and then you realize your partner, your distributors, your importers, they are not reporting back the issues to manufacturers. They are, in their opinion, handling it, managing it without reporting it back to the manufacturer. So that's important, that you communicate with the individuals, economic operators downstream, that whether they are serious or non-serious, or whether they are handling or not, it must be reported back. So So no complaints is good, but it's not so good because uh, it put a lot of more question marks that if the process is effective or not. So be mindful of that and do challenge your uh, importers and distributors, and then make sure that they report back. So auditors, we focus on that. If there are limited complaints from first certain region, then they go a little more scrutiny to assess if the communication mechanism is effective. Um, so that is important, one of the key elements. Um, we spoke about, of course, general auditing principles, assess the procedure, and if you are following the procedure, for example, uh, um, define frequency of generating reports for class 1, and following all the, if you have submitted the reports to your notified body, and all those things that are defined in your procedure, if you are practicing your um, procedure or not. So templates, as we have said, templates are good. They are not mandatory, but it is advisable. So it gives you a lot more focus and um, regimented approach to follow on. So from notified body perspective, it was kind of interactive. I have covered a few non-conformities potentials already, but if there is no plan or report, or that the plan is not covering all the requirements, or report is not covering all the requirements, proactive inputs are not visible, there's no linkages between PMS and risk management or design controls. These are all very common non-conformities that we observe quite frequently. For post-market clinical follow-up perspective, as I explained, there's no documented PMCF plan. You must have a PMCF plan even if there is no PMS activity required. So these are a few common non-conformities that we experience. So from auditing perspective, we must understand the PMS requirements, and then not only complying with MDR, but of course you translate the requirements into procedure and then practice it. Documentation is important. Anecdotal response is never adequate in an audit, so we must have a objective evidence, documented evidence that can be substantiated during an audit. So that is my side of things. Daniëlle, do you want to cover the market surveillance aspects very quickly?
And let me go into that topic. So I think in general, we see more and more focus from a market surveillance perspective of national competent authorities, where we have seen reports from IGJ focusing on PMS, appealing to manufacturers how important the importance of the role of PMS closing the loop to risk management, design, documentation, and the clinical evaluation. And more recently, Swissmedic published their findings from a rather larger market surveillance activities regarding 30 legacy devices which were high risk, so where even notified body oversight was in place. But then when they reviewed, they collected the PMS procedures, the PMS plan, the PSUR for the devices involved. They identified of the 30 devices that they sampled that in 20 cases they identified non-conformities, which was quite substantial. And then issues identified was like no PMS plan in place, or the procedure not lacking certain elements, so not fully complying to MDR requirements. But the majority of the cases was related to contents of the PSUR, for example, where they clearly identified, similar like you already stressed, that we need to include sales volumes. the patient population in use? Was that in scope, out scope? Is the frequency of use, was that within the expectations? Results from CAPA, etc. So we see more and more oversight from competent authorities, and so paying attention to the process of post-market surveillance is indeed important, I think. Yes.
Thank you, Daniëlle. Thank you. So with that, I think we have
Yes, we do have some
concluded. Thank you.
Yeah, we have one other poll we wanted to just touch base with the audience on and gauge how they're feeling with that. So, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to reporting PMS data to regulatory authorities? Okay. So far, number one is ensuring data quality and completeness, followed by navigating different regional regulations and requirements. And a close third, meeting reporting deadlines and timelines. So again, resources. Awesome, thank you. All right, we'll move into our Q&A session. So we'll start with this one here. Can you provide me with an example of benefit risk analysis abiding post-market surveillance?
Oh yes, that's a very good question. So benefit risk, again, one of the best practice expected is providing the ratios that we spoke about, sales to complaints, or user test or user test performed against customer complaints, or so any ratio giving the context of in which your device being used. So if you have a single use device, you can demonstrate that many sold in response, 100 units sold, I received 3 complaints or 4 complaints, whatever. So sales to complaints ratio, or install base to complaints ratio, or test perform against complaints ratio, and then complaints to vigilance or reportable incidents ratio. So even if you receive 100 complaints, how many were serious, so reportable? So these type of couple of course, there can be several others, but these are the very 2 main ones that I would suggest to demonstrate that demonstrate the benefit to risk is ensured through sales to complaints, complaints to vigilance.
And in addition to that, so that is also in full alignment when we look at manufacturing incident reports, where that same logic is followed, and that is used by competent authorities to do that same assessment based upon the numbers of adverse events reported in the country where the report is made versus Europe and globally, to also already see regional differences, etc., to get a feel for performance and safety of the device.
Excellent.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Daniëlle.
How do you define vigilance within the context of PMS under MDR?
So vigilance is one of the elements within so as I explained, so post-market surveillance is considered a system, a regime, an umbrella, and under that you have several sources of information. So customer complaints is one of them, and then customer complaints, if becomes or adjudged to be a vigilance, you have to report. So vigilance is one of the sources of data that is governed by the post-market surveillance. So post-market surveillance is an umbrella, vigilance is part of that process, even though independent, but it's connected.
Great, thank you. Next question is PMCF required for all medical devices, or are there specific scenarios where it is mandatory under the MDR?
Post-market clinical follow-up, as we explained, the requirement fundamentally is to assess the risk management, the residual risk, what are the residual risk and how those being managed. But even if there is no residual risk or there is no outstanding untreated risk, you still have to have a plan. So there's no exception for not having a post-market clinical follow-up plan. You must have plan. Whether you need it or not depends on the risk management and the clinical efficacy and the context in which the device is being used.
Okay, thank you. How has the absence of UDAMED impacted the PMS process for medical devices under MDR?
Sorry, repeat that, okay, Megan?
Yes, how has the absence of UDAMED impacted the PMS process for medical devices?
Okay, so from manufacturer's perspective, it's something that it's not like it used to exist and we don't have it anymore, so we miss UDAMED so much. UDAMED is coming along slowly, so I personally think it is shouldn't affect manufacturers a lot, because all they have to do is to submit or share that information with the notified bodies. So they don't. I don't think there is a big impact, but of course, when it will become available, the life will be a lot easier.
Yeah, and potentially for vigilance reporting and data sources, it will serve a similar purpose as currently a MOD database is doing, or a DEAN database, but that will take quite some time for Europe to be on similar levels regarding availability of the data in the UDAMED database.
Okay. Also asked, I think similar to the last one on benefit risk, but how does the concept of benefit risk assessment apply to PMS?
To PMS?
Yes.
Benefit risk is the reason we are conducting all these activities. We are trying to continuously assess what is the benefit risk ratio. So ultimately, anything that we are doing, the prime intent of having a post-market surveillance is to continuously assess what is the benefit risk ratio of the device, what is the contacts we are using. So in an ideal world, the benefit continuously outweigh the associated risk, and post-market surveillance regime and system is continuously demonstrating objectively and quantitatively that the benefit are outweighing the risk. So this is the intent. So post-market surveillance is an objective and quantitative way to demonstrate that we are achieving our benefit risk ratio, desired ratio.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, we'll do one final question. How can we implement Article 10A, informing authorities about potential product discontinuations, into our PMS system and PMS relevant SOPs or QMS?
Any significant changes must be reported to your notified body to begin with. So the change control and your embedded mechanisms for notifying significant changes to your notified body, that is your first port of call. And then, of course, depending on nature of the change, it can have other mechanisms, but that is the first port of call. Your change notification process is very good. Notified bodies spend a lot of time on that process. So how do you communicate with your notified bodies for any potential change, whether it is significant or less significant, but there should be a established communication link between notified body and the manufacturer. And of course, if there are vigilance and reportable issues, there is an established mechanism, and through that process, you can also communicate with your competent authorities and regulators. Daniëlle, do you want to add something more to it?
Oh, no, I think that is fully correct. And regarding the obligations under Article 10A, there needs to be the assessment what the impact of no longer having products available on the market. So that's also where the assessment comes from, like that we have to monitor the performance and safety of similar devices so that we know whether there will be still products available in the market, etc. So links also to post-market surveillance in addition to the change management process.
Okay, we do have one final question. We did cover mainly MDR here, so this one I think was good to clarify. So this presentation is on MDR 2017-745. Are the PMS requirements similar to IVDR 2017-746?
The requirements are more or less the same, but I'll let Daniëlle take that one to explain a little more on IVDR.
Yeah, I agree with Salman, but obviously there are the differences. But maybe we can do a separate webinar focusing more on IVDR aspects going forward.
Awesome. On that cliffhanger, we hope to see you guys for that one too. Thank you, Salman and Daniëlle. Appreciate your time and making this very informative. We will be sending these presentation slides out along with the recording, so you'll get that via email, like I mentioned. We also have the other 2 sessions in the series next week, Wednesday and Thursday, so back to back. The one on Wednesday is on economic operators under the MDR, and the Thursday session is on technical documentation under the MDR. So we hope to see you then. I'll put it in the question box here so you have that link. And without further ado, yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate your time and thank you for being here.